In our video today, we will be explaining the pathway of an action potential, which is triggered by the opening of sodium channels in a neuron.
An action potential is an electrical signal that neurons use to communicate. It begins in the axon hillock after a series of chemical messages received by the dendrites of the neuron. Once at the axon hillock, the action potential begins moving down the axon in a jumping motion known as saltatory conduction. Action potentials only move in one direction, from the hillock to the axon terminals, where they will be converted into a chemical signal to be passed on to the next neuron.
In this diagram of a sodium and potassium pump within the plasma membrane of a neuron, it is seen that a neuron at its resting potential has many open potassium channels, but very few open sodium ion channels. This causes more potassium ions to diffuse out of the cell, while not allowing many sodium ions to flow in. Overall, this causes a more negative charge within the cell. The outflow of potassium ions continues in order to keep the chemical and electrical forces in balance, but the small amount of sodium inflow that is allowed prevents the voltage from becoming too negative. This is Axie the action potential. Oh, yeah. He is just resting right now, and he's preparing for his big race. He's a master hurdler. He's about to go and do his relay race.
After the resting stage, there's the depolarization stage. Here, due to a stimulus, sodium is able to enter the cell due to the gated ion channels. As a result of this, the membrane potential of inside the cell is able to increase. If the membrane potential gets high enough, usually around negative 50 millivolts, then a threshold will occur.
Before Axie can even think about running, he needs more and more encouragement from the crowd.
Woo! Go Axie!
Yeah!
Let's go Axie!
Ready, set, go!
Once the membrane potential hits the threshold, an action potential can happen. This gives rise to the rising phase. Here, enough sodium channels are open that the membrane potential will actually get closer to sodium's membrane potential than potassium's membrane potential.
Yeah, Axie, come on, you got this. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
The rising phase of an action potential ends when the membrane charge reaches about 25 millivolts. At this time, potassium channels open, causing potassium to rush out of the cell in an attempt to equalize the charge. This causes the membrane charge to reduce once again as the positively charged potassium ions move out of the cell. This phase is also known as repolarization because it restores the polarization of the membrane.
As Axie completes his course, he passes off the baton to the next runner to complete his own course.
The next stage of an action potential is the undershoot, in which the sodium channels are closed while some potassium channels are open. As a result, potassium ions continue to flow out of the cell, and the membrane potential is closer to the equilibrium potential of potassium ions. Eventually, the balance of resting potential is restored as the potassium channels close.
After Axie's completed his running, he is super tired and he can't do any more running during this time.
Oh my god, I'm so tired. I'm a fake.
After the undershoot stage, the neuron returns to its resting potential, where most voltage-gated sodium channels are closed and some potassium channels are open. And the neuron is ready yet again for another action potential.
Once the action potential reaches the axon terminal, it triggers the release of neurotransmitters from the synaptic vesicles. These neurotransmitters diffuse through the synapse and bind with receptors on the postsynaptic membrane. These neurotransmitters determine whether the action potential continues down the next neuron or stops with this one. Inhibitory neurotransmitters prevent the action potential from continuing, while excitatory neurotransmitters continue the reaction down the next neuron.